Hey guys, hope you're well. I have day 2, Danny versus Philip Campos in the attempted restraining order case to convert, of course, the temporary restraining order into the permanent restraining order. And as always, if you guys do want to help, since I'm trying to get to Kansas for another trial, I had to fly out from Denver. So spent about $600, so it'd be nice to at least get back maybe even a quarter of it would be cool. So if you'd like to do that, I have my links, but do want to thank Paula Paylot and Raymond Pembroke for being consistent supporters from the very beginning. So I really appreciate you guys and everybody else who's helped out. And even if you haven't, thank you guys for watching. That's what counts. So there are about 5 main points. So I'll talk, as always, I'll talk about the 5 main points, give you a more organized, fluid overview, and then get a little more choppy as I directly quote people. There is a lot of quotes because we didn't do a lunch thing. So there will be a lot to read. I want to say there's probably about 8 pages of quotes. So this will be a long one, although the opening, what you need to know, will be fairly quick itself. That should only be about 10 minutes, and then we'll go and exactly directly quote them. So first, so what happened today? Today, essentially, it was Dorothy Gibbons-White putting Philip Campos on the stand. And we'll start with the ending, because what's interesting is Campos didn't seem to be doing too well. He didn't seem to be answering effectively to help his case. And Kendrick Moxon, at the very end, when there was, after break, when there's only 15 minutes left of the case, tried to claim that Philip was too stressed, was too traumatized, and shouldn't be continued being questioned by Dorothy Gibbons-White. That was not granted by the judge, but it's indicative that Moxon and Campos, due to Campos's testimony as a witness, that they are losing the case. So I would certainly say that's a good sign. If you're trying to nix your witness and get him thrown out, then that's not a great sign at all. Other news, 2 witnesses that will not be on the agenda, that got nixed, because the judge really wants to narrowly focus this case, which I think is a good thing. Kelly, not a witness. Mindy, not a witness. So those 2 witnesses that might have had an impact, either positively or negatively, they will not take the stand. Tomorrow, the witnesses will essentially be girlfriend versus girlfriend. We will have Leah on the stand as a witness, and we will have the girlfriend, Miss Heath, of Mr. Philip Campos. So that should be kind of an interesting dynamic in that regard. So the 5 main points that were discussed today. One was the legality and the knowledge that Philip Campos has of his scooter. How committed is he to his scooter? How much does he rely upon it? How necessary is it? Is it really necessary for him? Oh, hey, what up? There's the legend himself. That guy won, so I think we're good with the same attorney. And as you can see, there's the previous winner. But yeah, so the legality of the scooter is certainly an aspect of this, because interestingly enough, Philip Campos couldn't name the brand, and you do wonder aloud, could this scooter have been given out essentially as a prop even? Is that entirely possible? He couldn't name the brand. He couldn't say where he got it from. He said he got it a long time ago. So he was very unspecific and unknowledgeable about the cost, the history, and the internal dynamics of his scooter. Couldn't even tell the brand, couldn't say much of that. That was interesting. Another big thing, and we'll get into the exact dates when I look at the notes. Chiropractor's visit. Of course, Campos says he was in so much pain, so much injury, he used the word injury, that he was in so much injury that he had to go to the chiropractor. Oddly enough, he waited 2 months to go to the chiropractor, and he explains why, and that he was going to wait a little bit, and then it got worse and worse and worse. And not only that, but what was interesting is that receipts of the chiropractor visit was provided. What was not provided was the actual medical records. The details, if you actually open it and say, this client came for this specific issue, we did this to treat him, we subscribed these to make him feel better, this is the seriousness of his condition, all of that would be in the medical records. Interestingly enough, Moxon did not include those. Now, you could say that's incompetence, and maybe perhaps Moxon forgot to do so, but more likely is that there was probably not there wasn't information in there that would confirm extreme consequential long-term injury to Mr. Campos, that it was more than, maybe I think it's perfectly legitimate Campos could have felt pain for a day, 2 days, 3 days, but certainly not for 2 months after after you're on your scooter and you knock bodies for a moment. If there was something that made him appear sympathetic in the granular details, then Moxon, I feel like, would have surely released that. So that speaks volumes, and that speaks volumes to the judge. The receipts were shown. I don't know how Moxon wouldn't think that Dorothy would ask him about that. You think that would be kind of obvious. So that was interesting. Another dynamic which was talked about quite a lot, again, with Philip Campos on the stand, with Dorothy Gibbons-White questioning him. So he looked better, of course, when Moxon was questioning him, but it's a whole different ballgame now that he's in the crosshairs of Gibbons-White. So another big thing that she's asking about, the chiropractor, one additional thing. She asked, how did you find this chiropractor? He said it was a friend, and she asked, was it a friend in Scientology? He said yes. So it was, the chiropractor was found through a member of Scientology, which could very well mean that perhaps there's some doctor out there that might get paid off. Nice work if you could get it. A discussion about camera angles was another really big thing. Of course, Kendrick Moxon tried to submit a whole bevy of new photo stills from videos that were rejected because that was too last minute. And Danny's version of the video was accepted, even though Moxon was trying to impede that acceptance of Danny's version of the video. So the video that Moxon wants to use as proof, or the video at least that was used to initially get the police to arrest Danny, because remember, this all started with an arrest. That didn't go anywhere, but that's how it all started, was security footage from Scientology, and they're trying to use that again. Oddly enough, the video, Scientology has a multitude of cameras lying around all over the place. The camera that was used was the one that had further distance than the other one that could have been used, that was twice as far away as a much closer security camera that the Scientology security did not submit. So that was interesting too. Gibbons-White said, well, in the name of fairness, why wouldn't you have there are 4 cameras, not just one that you use, but why wouldn't, at least 4 cameras, why wouldn't you have all 4 cameras in all of the footage if you feel like you were truly in the right? Not much of an answer for that. So that was mainly the primary arguments before I get into the quotes. I have to say at this point, guys, it's looking good for Danny, and I would say relief that Kelly is not testifying, because if Kelly testifies, then what that means is you could look at external situations that clarify the person's character, and that could be a dangerous game. Because, yes, Kelly could have clarified the character of Philip Campos miming a death motion at people, but Moxon would have been very quick to use a pepper spray, which would have made Danny look bad. The good news is the judge ruled... Ooh, whoops. The judge ruled, in addition to Kelly not being able to testify, and Mindy's not, that... sorry, guys, I'm blanking out. I should drop the phone. But yeah, so in addition to the testifying, the judge ruled that Mindy's not testifying, Kelly's not testifying, pepper spray discussion can't occur. So that's what I was trying to get out. Any evidence of any history of pepper spray usage by Danny, which I still feel he was in the right for, but objectively speaking, it would not have made him look good in court, quite frankly speaking, especially if you don't know the guy. That is out. I think that's for the better. Why run the risk when Dorothy wanted to put Kelly in the first place? I don't know. Although, if you're an attorney, you might think the judge might get rid of the judge might get rid of what you want if the judge got rid of something that you wanted to stay in, right? So if she got rejected with something, so maybe it's easier for her to reject Ken Moxon's. So maybe that might have been some impressive legalese chess going on. That's kind of my theory on it. I don't think she ever really... Maybe she did want Kelly to testify about that, but my guess is that was sort of a pawn, almost. But it looks good. The last thing, which is particularly interesting, before we go into the quotes, is that Philip is from Kentucky. Philip moved, I believe, and I'll double check all of this, only about a year ago to do specific services in Scientology. He remarked that once he's done with his services, which should be in less than a year, that he will move back to Kentucky, my old Kentucky home. Now, what does that mean? Well, he's leaving. He's moving. What's the point of an RO? If you're only going to be here for a handful of months, what's the point, right? So, a restraining order arguably would be to improve the lives of the person who shows up to the same place every day and is planning on showing up to the same place every day, perhaps for the next decade. If you're only doing that for a year, why it might not even be necessary, because it's not even really his home. So she also kind of got him on that very deftly and very effectively. Now we'll get into some more of the quotes. So this is Dorothy asking Philip Campos some questions. Do you testified against the protesters, correct? Philip says, I didn't see protesters, I saw agitators. Are there others, Dorothy asks, you think are agitators? Yes, there are. And what does that word mean, agitators, Dorothy asks? Philip says, well, when people use hate speech, when they pull your scooter away from you, when someone says you're a psycho motherfucker to me, that's all hate speech. Dorothy says, did my client call you a psycho motherfucker? Philip says, other gang members did. So he uses that gang member attack. Dorothy says, you said you were told because you weren't. You said you were harassed because you were told to leave and that you weren't wanted. And that that they interfered with your church services. Were those things happening inside of your church or even on church property? So she makes a fair argument. All of this stuff happening is on the sidewalk. The sidewalk is legal, applicable space. So it's like rules for me, but not for thee, right? If the argument is that Danny is impeding his right to religiously worship, well, he's not actually at the space of religious worship. He's not at the space that the religious institution owns, nor is he inside the building specifically. And if Campos says his right is being infringed upon, well, is Danny's right on a publicly accessible sidewalk, as Campos tried to argue, I'm just trying to use a publicly accessible sidewalk. Well, great. So too is Danny with his consistent protesting. So again, she's very smart in getting these little nuggets and trying to flip them effectively. So she asks, was this happening on church property? Philip Campos says, I don't know. I was on the sidewalk. Dorothy asks, are they owned by the Church of Scientology? Phil says, don't know. You'd have to ask the property manager. Dorothy says, have you brought restraining orders against others? Phil says, I don't know. You have to ask my attorney. Dorothy says, well, does the attorney file restraining orders without your knowledge? And Phil says, well, I'm talking about this RO. So it looks like Dorothy uncovered another nugget that he hasn't completely denied. Because you'd think Philip Campos would just say, well, no, I never have done that. But he might have had some run-ins with some other protesters, and he might have gone through the initial phases of creating an RO against them. Perhaps didn't follow through, but there could be legal records indicating that. So he tried to dodge the question as effectively as she could, but she gave this interesting nugget that it looks like he was eyeing some other protesters potentially, because he could have just issued this plain flat-out denial. He decided not to do so, so that speaks volumes. Dorothy says, when you felt agitators were taking over the block, what do you mean? Phil says, well, it's my church. Shouldn't I come and go? Dorothy says, so you have the right to walk on the street free from yelling. Phil says, yes, to get to my church. Dorothy says, so you think it's wrong that people are yelling and screaming? Philip says, yes. Skipping this page, not that important. So now there's a conversation about who called when, why they called when. So Dorothy asks, so you said on March 9th. Remember, guys, these are all based on 2 incidents. Thank you for the guy who corrected me. Not incidences, incidents. Based on 2 incidents, March 9th and May 9th. March 9th is the scooter scene. That's the crux of it. And May 9th hinges on a bunch of verbal interactions. So Dorothy says, on March 9th, you called the police. Did you personally call? Philip says, yes. Were you aware, Dorothy says, were you aware that they were arresting Danny. He said, no. What did you tell the police? Dorothy asked. I said to the police, Philip says, that I was attacked and that my back was injured. Dorothy says, when you called the police, you called on your own phone? Did you speak with the security guard about getting the footage? He says, yes. Dorothy says, so the police pulled back into the building and security volunteered the building? Philip says, the video? Philip says security saw the cameras as well as the police, and they gave the video to the police. There were several ways this was videotaped. So he admits that. Philip himself says there are several ways this is videotaped. Why are you only using one segment of it? Dorothy says, I want to find out the security personnel who are witnesses, which ones they are. And he says, I couldn't identify them. There are multiple people. And Dorothy says, is this footage based on only one camera? And Philip says, I believe it is. They said they had the footage. Dorothy says, did you describe the person that they should look out for after the so-called Danny attack? Philip says, I was so shocked I couldn't properly do it, but security ID'd Danny. Dorothy says, and you got into a police car after that? Phil says, yes, I was taken to identify him. Dorothy says, what did they say as they were arresting him? Philip says, they said it was for theft. I made sure to correct them. So that was the original. Apparently somebody said theft, or they thought it was theft, which is interesting. And I wonder if there's a reason to get the police because somebody originally said theft. And then, of course, it was a lot less consequential. Maybe they wouldn't have even shown up initially if they didn't hear of this theft potential. Dorothy says, if you don't get a restraining order, you'll move back to Kentucky. Philip says, yes, I'm scared. But Dorothy says, you're only in Los Angeles temporarily. Philip says, yes, planning was always originally planning to move back in about a year from now. Dorothy says, we talked about this before, right? Dorothy says, is my client saying we don't want you here? Is my client saying that hate speech? Philip says, yes. And that compliment to Danny. Discrepancy between, not that there's anything wrong with it, the communication of Streets LA and Danny. If Streets LA could win his case, now, they deserve it, but saying some pretty mean shit to Joey, cursing, getting inappropriate, talking about his son, getting personal. I enjoyed all of it, but it didn't make Streets look good, right? That's his style, and that's certainly not mine, but I admire it. That's his style. Hit him where it hurts, hit him in the heart, get loud, get aggressive. Guess who's not like that, guys? Danny. So if Streets, with all the crazy shit he said, they couldn't get an RO against him, Danny's Mr. Mellow, despite the identification as a gangster. He is, in fact, Mr. Mellow. So, again, guys, this is kind of a nice lesson on how you protest. You can do it whatever style you want, and you might still win, because Street certainly did. But you could do it whatever style you want. But if you're more relaxed, not as aggressive, not as hostile verbally, not as loud, it might help you should you get an RO. Just a little food for thought. But do what you'd like. So Dorothy asks, is my client saying we don't want you here, free speech? And Philip says yes. Right? Like what? Okay. How is that hate speech? Dorothy asking, so is my client saying we don't want you here, hate speech, right? You could argue that what Street said could have been hate speech. This, we don't want you here, is that really hate speech? I think that's a stretch. Philip says yes. Dorothy says, that might have been the moment he loses a case, honestly. Dorothy says, so you have as much of a right as anybody, but not Danny. Phil says they have a right to be on the sidewalk, but they don't have the right for hate speech. So now everything's winnowing down. It's been granted that Danny should be allowed to be on public property. So now it's like, well, they lost that, so they're hanging on that one last thread, which is ostensibly the hate speech. Dorothy says, so he can be on the sidewalk, but can't use the hate speech, we don't want you to be here. Dorothy then says, Is it your hope that the judge will issue the restraining order based on hate speech? And Campos says, well, partially. Then they go to the chiropractic bills. They present the chiropractic bills to the judge as an exhibition. Dorothy says, so these are all the bills you have from the chiropractor. Philip says, yes. I went 4 or 5 times. Dorothy says, through those materials, what's the first date? Philip says, April 10th. Remember, this happened March 9th, guys. And Dorothy says, and what was the exact date of the assault? Philip says, March 9th. Dorothy says, so a month later. Did he go to the hospital after? Philip says, no. I don't like hospitals and was hoping my back would get better. Dorothy says, and how did you find this chiropractor? Did someone from the Church of Scientology recommend it? Philip says, I don't know. Dorothy says, was this owned by the Church of Scientology? He said, it appears... Phil says, I don't know. Dorothy says, who told you to go? And Philip said, somebody I know in my church. Whoops, 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 whoops. Again, that's not good for Philip. Dorothy, so these are not medical records, just bills. Philip says, I didn't know I needed that. Shocker. Dorothy says, so you didn't think the medical records were needed? But receipts don't have a diagnosis. And he said, sure. It could have been for anything. You're right. It could have bought $145 worth of supplements. So he half admitted that this could be for anything in kind of a big mistake, yet again, that he made. So you can see why Moxon was eager to get him off the stand with Dorothy. Then there's a big logistical question about the scooter. So we have video, Dorothy asked Philip. We have video by Aja. Which are your exhibits? I put out the still photos. Was it based on these videos that helped you bring the RO? Philip says yes. What we see in the Aja photos is you're with your scooter, and that you need to hold on to it, apparently. Did that scooter move because you moved it? Philip said possibly. And Dorothy says, and when you have that physical interaction, initial physical interaction with Danny, you're saying, looking at that footage, that Danny's foot just unexpectedly popped in front of your passageway. And Philip says, no, I got pulled off the sidewalk. Meaning that he was on the sidewalk with his scooter and then he was getting pulled off the sidewalk. Dorothy says, why would Danny move his feet at the same time you're parking your scooter? We see again my client's hand on the scooter. Danny's feet seem wedged in between a tree and your scooter, inclining that he was stuck by Campos. And it shows my client yanking your scooter. Is there any photos that actually show my client physically yanking your scooter? Philip says, well, we can't see his hand in this specific footage. That's why they wanted to use specific footage, guys. Because if you use the other footage, you would see that Danny's hand is at far too of a distance to utilize it to try to whack Campos' scooter. So you can see where all of this kind of falls into place. Phil says you can't see his hand. Dorothy says, but where you see him in these photos, my client's feet are wedged at a tree. The scooter and your feet are at the sidewalk. And I think we're probably almost finishing up. Would be my guess. I think we're good. Anything interesting? No. So there you have it, guys. Oh wait, no, there's a whole... It's all of this. Not even close to being done. So Campos continues with Dorothy Gibbons White. Dorothy asked, do you have knowledge about how Scientology previously treated the protesters? Philip says, no, that's not relevant. And then there's another video, and Dorothy shows Danny in this video. Again, all of this video is based entirely on the scooter. So Dorothy says, is that you in the distance? And you see a woman saying he's blocking the sidewalk. And Dorothy asks, is the person standing in the middle of the sidewalk you? He says, yes. Did you hear the gentleman say, in the video you could hear this, did you hear a gentleman say, hey buddy, get out of the way? Philip Campos says, I didn't hear it at the time, I do now. Dorothy says, where do you usually ride the scooter, on the sidewalk or on the street? Philip says, on the sidewalk. I go to Fountain Street on the street, but if I go to the street on Fountain and utilize the street, I take my life into my own hands. Therefore, he's explaining why he uses the sidewalk. Dorothy says, you said in testimony there were additional security cameras that you later became aware of. Philip says, yes. Dorothy says, yet the video that is being used in this case is footage from much further away than the other security cameras. Philip says, yes. So who gave you these? Philip says, security. Dorothy says, so security gave you the video of the best angle that would help your case. And then Philip even says, inherently, so he kind of admitted that. And then he like almost backtracks and says, well, I don't really know. Dorothy says, do you feel if you won, it would be helpful for other Church of Scientology members to do the same? And Phil actually smartly responds, because you can see where she's trying to go with this. And he says, no, this is about me. This has nothing to do with other Scientologists. Dorothy then asks, so all of this occurs on March 9th. Why did you wait 3 entire months to file a restraining order? Philip says, I never realized I could do a restraining order at the time. Okay. Dorothy says, are you aware of other restraining order cases? Philip says, no. Dorothy says, do you recognize anybody in this audience? Philip says, I recognize the man from the wall. That's DOA, sitting next to the wall. Was there anything happening on May 9th? Because there's a second incident, which is all just verbal. So you're not just basing your RO on March 9th, May 9th as well. And they're trying to base everything on May 9th, because May 9th was the visual stuff, the verbal stuff, coupled with the same day, they're trying to all do it the same day, of the so-called super chat. So that's what that's largely based on, with other verbal altercations. So DOA was mentioned. And they play a video for a while. And this video is essentially disproves a lot and talks about sighting logistics, meaning that Danny was filming the intersection, not him, and that Philip Campos went into his line of sight, his space, essentially, not necessarily the other way around. Based on the video, did you see that Danny was taping a public intersection and Danny looked to his left and you appeared? While you're watching the video today, and Phil says, well, I wasn't closer than 10 feet away. The judge says, so is it your testimony you're about 10 feet away from the respondent? Whoops, that's close, because that's meaning 10 feet away, meaning he's the first to insert himself, and he inserted himself very closely. Dorothy says, is it your testimony or 10 feet away? He says, I guess. And additionally on that day, video shows that Campos is also kind of going back and forth on his scooter. So while you were scootering back and forth with a smile on your face, Dorothy asks, on May 9th, why were you scootering back and forth with a smile on your face, Dorothy asks, on May 9th, 2 months after the assault? And yet you felt unsafe. Philip says, I wanted to make them see I wasn't afraid of them. I wasn't fed up. Well, he kind of admitted. He said he wanted to make them see he wasn't afraid. Okay, so then you're saying you're not afraid. And you're inserting yourself into a situation. That wouldn't necessarily strengthen any attempt to get an RO whatsoever. He's saying he wasn't. Now, you could argue that he's wanted to see him, but that could be interpreted as he was not afraid. If you're not afraid and you're not feeling emotional, mental duress, then what's the point of getting a restraining order, right? Phil says, I want to make them see I wasn't afraid of them, I was fed up. Dorothy says, were you angry? Phil says, yes, and I was scared. But I wanted to look like I wasn't afraid. Dorothy says, did you see my client go up to you? Philip says, all I heard was, we don't want you here, and that's harassment. Then there's this whole thing about this video that got thrown out, and that I don't even know what they're talking about. They again go back to the date we were just talking about. Philip says, I wasn't trying to get a reaction. Oh, Dorothy asks, on this incident, the ones we've been talking about, were you trying to agitate them? Phil says, I wasn't trying to get a reaction from anyone. I just wanted to show them. Dorothy says, but didn't some of the protesters say previously that they were afraid of you? And there was a previous protester who asked somebody to walk her back to her car, due to fear of Phil. Phil says, and they showed that clip of the video. Phil says, yes, but I think that was planned. Dorothy says, anything else between March, because there are 3 incidents, now it's getting narrowed down to 2. Anything else between between March 9th and May 9th? Phil says, well, nothing was done for the police, so I was scared in that time frame. Dorothy said, but if you're scared and nothing was done at the police, well, I guess he felt like the police didn't keep Danny in jail, so that was his argument. Dorothy said, did Danny come after you? Phil said, well, I stayed clear of that area. And Dorothy says, do you feel he came after you on May 9th? And finally, I'm done. And he says yes, and then she has no further questions. So, interesting case, guys. As I mentioned, we have a lot in store tomorrow, including, in addition to the duel of the girlfriends, Danny will also be on the stand. So hope you guys enjoy, and thank you all for watching. You take care. Bye-bye.